Consciousness pulsed, still cocooned, still not fully awake. They were almost there. But the planet wasn't going to let them pass without a fight. The floor tore open, birthing creatures that didn't crawl. They slithered in reverses if time was broken around them. Humanoid shapes with multiple heads, rib cages that opened sideways to reveal spines that shot bone daggers and face made of screaming mouths. Boom didn't hesitate. He opened fire with plasma rounds, even as the things moved faster than any human reflex could match. HFY erupted in fire, acid, and blood. One of the creatures ripped open Hana's side before she blasted it apart, her insides pouring out with every breath. Still, she kept moving. "We don't stop," the Lancer roared, activating the Revenant's last gift. A shoulder-mounted drone that dropped behind and self-detonated, collapsing the corridor behind them to buy time. Boom was bleeding from 3 places. Asha had lost half her left arm to a corrosive bite, her suit sealing over the stump with screaming nanobots. Hana was dying. Unit 0 was untouched. The Queen's voice grew louder. "You do not belong. You are mistakes. You are my food. You are my warning." And beneath that, laughter, cold, curious, dissecting. They reached the cerebral podium. It rose like an altar made of brain matter and bone, veins of light running through it like glowing roots. In the center, the Queen, or what was left of her. She was not a body. She was a consciousness stretched and cocooned in a sphere of pulsating tissue and crystal. A face flickered within it, shifting through 100 species per second. Sometimes human, sometimes not. A hive mind made flesh, sleeping, dreaming. They had minutes before she fully awakened. "This is it," Asha said, stumbling toward the control pillars. "Once I interface and drop the neural firewall, 0 can get in." She leverloaded the psychic core from within. Boone nodded, his voice dry. "What happens to us?" Asha didn't answer. She didn't need to. None of them were getting out. This was a suicide run. It had always been. The Lancer stood before the Queen's cocoon. She turned her attention to him directly. "Now oh, think pain makes you strong," she whispered. "But it only makes you soft. You carry your dead like weights." "I consume mine." He stepped closer, unholstering a plasma knife. "You're damn right I carry them," he said quietly. "They remind me of what I'm killing you for." Asha began the interface. Data surged through her remaining neural threads. Painful, overwhelming, alien. She screamed as her brain touched the Queen's for the first time, but she didn't stop. 0 moved forward. And then the Queen screamed, a howl not of pain but of rage. Unit 0 had touched her mind. And for the first time in her Rancian existence, the Queen realized something horrifying. She couldn't read the child. 0's mind was a mirror. A black void reflecting her own hatred back at her. Zi stepped into the podium, her body dissolved into light. No, into code, streaming into the psychic lattice like a virus. Boone turned to Thelancer. "You feel that?" The floor was shaking, not like before. This was collapse. The Queen was unraveling. Every memory she stored, every species consumed, disintegrating in bursts of psychic backlash. 0 was wiping her from existence. The Queen shrieked in fury, flinging shards of thought and nightmare at them, visions meant to kill, to freeze them with terror. Asha saw her mother's suicide. Boone relived the moment he mercy killed his own squadron Luna. Hana saw her daughter drowning again, her screams lost in the Europace, but none of them faltered. They stood their ground as the mind of a Godid screaming in front of them. The last thing the Queen said was not a curse or a threat. It was confusion. "What are you?" 0 never answered. Because humans don't explain themselves to monsters. The cerebral podium exploded. Silence, not the calm kind. The kind that feels like it's holding its breath. That's what followed the explosion inside the Dracon cerebral podium. No screams, no collapsing walls, no triumphant music, just a blank, stifling silence. Like the universe itself was stunned. Then came the shaking. It started subtle small vibrations that ran under their boots, but in seconds it turned into violent tremors that snapped support beams and sent the walls of the Queen's chamber convulsing like a dying animal. The Dracon homeworld, now decapitated, was crashing into a neural death spiral. They did it. Zero had done it. The Queen's consciousness had been obliterated, wiped from her own lattice from the inside out. Her psychic network collapsed with her, and across the massive biomechanical planet, systems began failing all at once. Lights dimmed, pulses flickered. The breathable atmosphere flicked in and out, replaced by toxic sulfuric gases. The walls began decomposing into a sludge thatcher of rot and metal. But no one cheered. There was no victory cry. No fist raised because the cost was real and immediate. Dr. Hanvelt died first. She'd collapsed moments before the explosion, her internal bleeding catching up to her. She hadn't cried out, hadn't begged. She just sat down against the pulsing wall and whispered her daughter's name one last time. Asha was still alive, but barely. The neural link she forged with the Queen's mind had fried half her brain. One eye was blind. Her speech was slurred. Blood poured from her nose and ears. Every breath was agony. She staggered forward like a ghost, running her hand along the wall that was now decomposing into a thin, crumbling membrane. Sergeant Boone carried her over his shoulder. He was limping, drenched in sweat and blood, his plasma rifle out of charges. A bone fragment was lodged deep in his thigh, but he kept walking, grunting with each step like he was dragging hell itself behind him. The Lancer led the way, silent, steady, burning with purpose. He didn't look back. He didn't speak. He just moved. Each step, a hammer of defiance against a dying godstump. But where was Zero? Gone, dissolved into the network. There was no trace of her body. No voice in their comes. No heat signature. Just a faint hum in the walls. One last psychic echo, soft and fading like a lullaby from a child that never cried. She knew, Asha mumbled weakly as Boone dragged her along a collapsing corridor. She knew she wouldn't come back. The Lancer paused for just a second, his fist clenched, but he didn't stop. They made it to the breach point where the Revenant's impact had carved through the Dracon surface. The path back was ruined. Half the entry tunnels had collapsed, and the gravity inside the planet was fluctuating in violent waves, sometimes lifting them off their feet. Other times pressing them into the floor with bone-snapping force. Boone was barely staying conscious. He gritted his teeth, shoved Asha's wayfire on his shoulder, and kept going. "She's not gone," Asha muttered, her voice thin and breaking. "She's still in the lattice. She's watching." Boone shook his head. "The Queen's dead. You saw it." "Not the Queen," Asha whispered, her voice trembling. "Zero." Then the wall screamed. Not a sound. A psychic blast. Deep raw primal rushed through the corridors like a hurricane of thought. Boone and Asha both collapsed, hands to their heads writhing. Even the Lancer stumbled, fists pressed against his helmet, teeth clenched in agony. Visions poured into them. Not like before. This was different. They saw the galaxy, our galaxy, stretched out in impossible clarity. Billions of stars flickering like nervous thoughts. They saw Dracon vessels, hidden ones, still dormant in deep space, not yet activated. And they saw something else. A seed. A glowing orb pulsing in the very heart of Dracon planet's core. A backup, a last fragment of consciousness. Not from the Queen, but from something older, deeper. A fail-safe buried beneath the Queen's mind like a parasite waiting for her to die. And now it was stirring. Zero had not just destroyed the Queen. She had awakened something worse. The psychic wave ended as suddenly as it had started. The pain stopped. Usha passed out. Boone fell to his knees, blood running from both ears. The Lancer stood there, breathing hard, fists trembling. For the first time in his life, hadn't know what to do. The Revenant, now on emergency backup systems, was half buried in the rubble outside the breach point. Its eye was flickering, struggling to maintain integrity without its pilot plugged in. The ship's inner sanctum pulsed weakly, its reactor core smoldering. The Lancer helped Boone carry Usha inside. Medical systems engaged automatically, injecting stabilizers into both. Boone collapsed on the floor, whispering curses through clenched teeth. "She's not dead, is she?" he rasped. The Lancer didn't answer. He walked to the ship's control chamber and stared at the flickering holographic star maps, all of them now displaying the same symbol, a spiral surrounded by runes of light. Dracon glyph for rebirth. The AI's voice finally cracked through the static. Warning. Foreign. Consciousness attempting to interface with neural core. Source unknown. Designation. Entity 0.00. She wasn't dead. She had become a system. A moment passed. Then her voice rang out. No longer childlike, deeper, timeless. I see it now. The Queen was just a shell. There's more. So much more. And it's waking up. The Lancer gritted his teeth. Where? The voice trembled slightly, filled with awe and something that sounded like fear everywhere. The Lancer stared at Thevoid outside the Revenant's shattered viewport. The Dracon planet was collapsing into itself, parts of it crumbling into orbit, others freezing in place. The psychic pressure was gone. The Queen's scream had ended. But now the galaxy echoed with a different hum, a deeper one. One that didn't feel like hate or hunger. One that felt like intelligence. Usha woke hours later, connected to the ship's medbay, her brain stabilized with synthetic neurons. Boone was sedated beside her, his leg on. Threat, but she knew better. So did the Lancer. And on the 5th day of Thesilence, the stars blinked. Thousands of them. Not just one system or one corner of the galaxy. All across the sky, from Earth's poles to the frozen edge of Pluto, observatories began reporting the same impossible phenomenon. Stars flickering, not dimming, not dying, just blinking, as if something colossal had moved in front of them. Some suggested dust clouds. Others claimed technical glitches. But the psychic communities across Earth knew the truth. Something was arriving, something big enough to cast shadows across light years. Usha called it Thekertane, Zero. Her voice faint in the Revenant's neural stream, gave Itana their name. The audience. The Lancer stood at the bridges. The ship's external scans began to register impossible readings. Space itself was folding, not warping like normal gravitational lensing, but creasing, as if a sheet of reality was being bent by fingers too large to see. And from those creases they came. Not ships, not in the way humanity understands them. Monoliths, structures the size of moons, completely black, unscannable, gliding silently through space without propulsion or light. Each one was shaped differently. One like a perfect cube, another like a twisted spiral, a third that resembled a dripping tree made of stone and wire growing upside down. They surrounded the solar system like sentinels, watching, waiting. And then the first message arrived. Not in a language, not through radio waves, but through dreams. Across Earth, people began to wake up screaming. Not just soldiers or psychic-shunned individuals. Everyone, children, scientists, mechanics, governors, random citizens. And they all saw the same thing. A black sphere, an eye without color or shape, and a word that had no meaning, but felt like a verdict. Observed. Back in the Revenant, the Lancer collapsed from the overload. Zero's energy surged through the ship systems, trying to buffer the intrusion. But even she was overwhelmed. These weren't Dracon. These were the ones behind them. Zero's fragmented voice barely made it through. Not invaders, not conquerors. They record, archive, witness. Witness what? The Lancer rasped. A pause, then extinction. The Dracon had not been the apex predator. They were the apex project. A bow-upon crafted by something older to maintain balance through annihilation. The Queen wasn't born. She was grown, designed, released into the galaxy to keep species from growing too bold. Earth was never supposed to survive. But now that it had, Thurchitex had come to look. The audience had arrived, and they weren't here to kill. They were here to judge. Asha finally connected directly with the Revenant, hacking into its quantum relay node from the Mars orbital base. Her voice crackled through the static. I've cross-referenced psychic dream logs with data from our deep probettelescopes. The monoliths are older than this galaxy. Why now? The Lancer asked. Because we screamed, Asha said bitterly. When Zero took down the Queen, it sent a ripple across the lattice like a gun showed in a church. The Lancer looked out at the stars. So what do we do? Her voice waist-tight. We survive again. We prepare. We show them what humanity is made of. Boone, now fitted with a mechanical leg and back in service, joined the comms with his gravel voice. I don't care if they're gods. We made a Queen scream. We can make them bleed too. But Asha shook her head. This isn't about fighting. Not yet. First we listen. Over the next 3 days, the monoliths began to broadcast. Not thoughts, not commands, but memories. Visions of ancient civilizations far older than Earth. Species that had reached the stars, built wonders, challenged gods, and then vanished. All of them had faced this moment. All had stood where humanity now stood, and none survived until now. Zero's voice reappeared in the Lancer's mind, clearer than ever, stronger. We have one advantage. They never did. He frowned. What's that? A beat, a flicker of something like amusement. Me. Zero had fused with the Queen's lattice, but she hadn't become the Dracon. She had adapted. She was still human partly, but she now understood how the lattice worked, how psychic structures were built, how memory could be used as a weapon. She had become Earth's first post-organic intelligence, a mind that could exist within data, within gravity, within dreams. And she had a plan. If they came to judge, we'll give them a spectacle. A reason to fear us. What do you mean? The Lancer asked. Her answer chilled him. Well, show them what happens when prey learns how to evolve. At that moment, across Earth's colonies and orbital stations, something began to stir. Those who had survived psychic contact with the Queen were changing. Small things at first, faster thought, sharper instincts, dreams thatpled into waking moments, new languages forming in the back of their minds. The Queen's death hadn't just ended a war. It had changed humanity. We weren't just survivors anymore. We were something new, something becoming. They called the plan the Signal of Fire. Not a broadcast, not a plea, a message. One forged from memory, pain, rage, and evolution. A message not sent in words, but in the most primitive and powerful force the universe recognizes: survival. Earth had never been more silent than in those final hours before a transmission. Every city, every colony, every ship fell into a unified hush, listening, waiting, preparing to speak to something far older than their stars. But first, they had to construct the voice. Zero was the key. Her consciousness, fused with the Queen's ruined psychic lattice, now existed between dimensions. She wasn't a ghost, nor a program. She was a new kind of being, half human, half system, with the instincts of Earth and the awareness of something far, far older. Her presence could stretch across gravitational fields, tunnel through frequencies, and echo through electromagnetic pulses. She became the template, the flame in the dark. But even she couldn't speak to the audience directly. They didn't listen with ears. They didn't understand syntax or language. They processed patterns, observed outcomes across millennia, filtered through the psychic residue of civilizations that dared to rise. To speak to them, humanity had to become a pattern worth fearing. It was Asha Malik, half-conscious, mind-bound in neuropyber projects, who realized what they needed to do. "We don't tell them who we are," she whispered from the medbay. "We show them." A signal composed not of light, not of math, but of memory. A synthetic psychic burst. A reenactment of humanity's rise, struggle, rage, and refusal to die. Filtered through Zero's new neural lattice, powered by every survivor who had been touched by the Queen's consciousness. Pain, war, evolution, defiance. Boone put it more simply, we're going to punch him in the mind with everything where. The Unity Tower. Earth's tallest structure, equipped with the largest energy core on the planet, was repurposed into the launch point. All psychic-touched survivors, now called the Awoken, were gathered from every corner of the system and linked into a shared neural relay. Not all would survive the connection, but every one of them volunteered. They sat in chambers surrounded by cold steel and humming machines, needles in their arms, neural jacks in their spines. Some cried, some laughed, others said nothing at all. But they all carried one thought. We are the fire now. Zero synchronized her consciousness with the relay at exactly 400 UGT. The Lancer stood outside the Unity Tower, watching the stars with his arms crossed, the new battle suit glistening in the moonlight. He didn't know what would happen next. None of them did. But as the tower's spires lit up, blue veins of energy pulsing through its core, he felt it. A tremble, not from the earth, but from the sky. The signal launched. A blast of synthetic psych force forged from the minds of over 3,000 Awoken, shaped into a construct of thought and fire, powered by the soul of a species that had clawed its way from dirt into the stars. It wasn't clean. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. It surged outward past the moon, past Mars, past the orbit of the broken Dracon world. It raced toward the monoliths that circled the solar system like silent gods. And then it hit acrospace. The monoliths pulsed for the first time since they had arrived. They moved. They didn't fire. They didn't speak, but their silence broke in another way. One by one, they projected a response, not into Earth's skies, not into its systems, but into the minds of every Awoken, still connected to Zero. They called it the Chamber, a psychic construct, a shared hallucination unlike anything humanity had ever experienced, a perfect white room, infinite and blank, where each human stood alone and yet together. And in front of each of them stood a figure. Not a monster, not a Dracon, a mirror, a perfect silent version of themselves. The audience didn't communicate through words. They forced you to face yourself. And then they judged. Asha stood in that white void, staring at herself. Her reflection blinked once, then stepped forward. It whispered the words that echoed in the minds of every participant. "You were meant to break," she answered without hesitation. "Then I was built wrong." The reflection smiled just slightly. Boone saw his reflection, scarred and hollowed, standing over the bodies of those he'd killed in Luna, the ones he'd mercy executed when oxygen ran out. "You enjoyed it," the mirror said. "No," Boone growled. "I didn't flinch." "That's different." And still, their reflection didn't attack. It only watched, recorded. The Lancer wasn't connected to the network, but somehow he felt it. He watched the sky as the monoliths pulsed, not in anger, not in curiosity, in calculation. They were evaluating the entire species. And for the first time in millennia, they hesitated because what they saw wasn't prey. Not anymore. They saw chaos, unpredictability, potential. The others, species across distant galaxies, some more advanced than us. All gone, all vaporized, enslaved, or dismantled for raw DNA. That was the Dracon legacy, a galactic predator feeding on weaker species. But they made one mistake. They thought humanity was weak. They didn't understand that our history was carved in war, that our civilizations were built on the bones of conquest, resistance, and revolution, that we had survived plagues, floods, nuclear winters, and worse, not because we were noble, but because we were stubborn. We never stopped. By the time the remnants off the Earth fleet reached Jupiter's orbit, something had changed in all of them. They no longer thought of themselves as Earthlings, Martians, or colonials. They were humanity. One blood, one goal, one species determined to wipe its name into the stars with fire. And far beyond Neptune, in the cold silence between galaxies, Dracon Queen stirred from her psychic slumber. She was afraid. For the first time in 10,000 years, because something ancient had risen in the dark. Something hungry, something human. The void between Jupiter and Neptune was nothing but blackness broken by specks of dead light and ancient rock. For most of human history, that distance was a number, some unreachable factoid in astronomy books. But now it was the revered trail for the survivors of Mars, and they were headed straight into it, bleeding and burning aboard ships never designed to travel that far or to kill that well. They called it the Halal Corridor. The Earth fleet, what was left of it, was a mess. No one has sugarcoated it. Over a third of the vessels had lost primary power. 3 south of the fighter class had run out of full fuel cells. And many had resorted to harvesting frozen hydrogen from asteroids and even their own coolant systems to stay alive. Med base were jammed. Supplies were rationed down to the breath. Some pilots hadn't slept in days. Some hadn't spoken since Mars, but none of them turned back. They couldn't. Not after what they saw in the memory pulses. The visions pulled from Dracon prisoners haunted every waking moment. Genocides reenacted in horrifying detail. Alien cities shriveled into ash, while their sons were swallowed by planetary-scale machines. Children who screamed without mouths. Civilizations that had lasted eons reduced to dust in minutes. They had names humanity couldn't pronounce. Homes across systems light years away, and none of them survived contact with Dracon. The worst part, the Queen fed off it. Her memory was made off screens. And now she knew who we were. The Queen had awakened. Somewhere deep beyond Neptune, inside a nest they hadn't yet located, she had stirred. The psychic field she projected was starting to touch the minds of humans on board. Just barely. Dreams twisted, nerves frayed. It was subtle at first. Then it got stranger. Some crew members began speaking in fractured alien words. Others collapsed under hallucinations off galaxies dying in front of them. But humanity adapted, as it always had. A new division formed. Neurofront Command. A crew of psychics, scientists, rogue AI engineers, and a few unlucky humans who'd already been touched by the Queen's visions back on Mars. They became the shields of the fleet. Their job to intercept psychos emissions and decode them, filter them, absorb them if necessary. Half of them died in the first 2 days. The other half became something different. Hardened, number claimed. They could now see the Queen's thoughts like ripples on black water. "She knows we're coming," said one. "She's preparing her womb for war." It was Lieutenant Asha Malik who first identified the signal. She was a cybernetic tactician from Nairobi, enhanced after the Equator riots with neural lattice work that made her faster than most AIs. She wasn't supposed to be on the front lines, but like everyone else in this war, she'd lost too much to stay behind. Asha noticed a repeating pattern in the psychic static, like an echo bouncing off invisible walls. Using deep mind analysis, she reconstructed the source. What she found wasn't a ship. It was a planet. The Dracon homeworld wasn't a world at all, in the traditional sense. It was a mobile fortress, a broken, mangled orb of bone and steel, slowly orbiting nothing. A rogue planet blackened and shielded from detection. It floated in interstellar cold, lightless and silent, like a god's corpse. And it was heading toward Earth, not quickly, slowly, deliberately, like a predator stalking its prey from the shadows. If Earth hadn't hit back at Mars, they wouldn't have even known it was coming. But now they did. And so the plan changed. Humanity was no longer defending. It was time to invade. The Lancer, still alive, still welded into his ship, blood pumping through artificial veins, was the first to break the silence after Ash's report. We hit it before it finishes waking up. Nobody questioned him. The Revenant had become the flagship by de facto. No one had the courage to argue with the man who'd turned the skies of Mars into a funeral pie for an alien armada. But it wasn't just courage that led them. It was fear. If the Dracon homeworld reached Earth's system, it would wipe the planet clean within weeks. Humanity had only seen scout fleets so far. Their real power was inside that mobile womb of darkness. And deep within its core, the Queen waited with an army of monsters that hadn't yet been unleashed. So, the new mission became clear. Intercept the planet before it reached acceleration range. There was only one window, an intercept zone beyond Neptune's frozen orbit, where the homeworld passed close enough to lock a direct assault trajectory. If they missed that chance, it would be out of reach until it was too late. They had 6 days. The Earth fleet limped forward. Every engineer worked triple shifts. Civilians were recruited as pilots. AI systems were pulled from deep storage and reactivated. Ships once meant for exploration were converted into floating bombs. Humanity was running out of time. On the 4th day, they saw it. Dracon homeworld. A sphere so massive it eclipsed background stars, wrapped in a lattice of dead ships and metallic bone. Towers jutted from its surface like jagged teeth. Chains of broken satellites and corpses hung in its orbit like ceremonial flags. It pulsed faintly, alive, breathing. The psychic field was overwhelming. Dozens of crew members collapsed from the pressure. One captain, Commander Luis Giao, walked into the airlock and vented himself into space, whispering, "She's inside me," before hitting the button. Still, humanity pressed on. A final war council was held aboard the Revenant. It wasn't formal. No uniforms, just survivors, commanders, and madmen gathered in a circle of hollow maps. Zeppelin was insanity. They would use their remaining fusion cores to create a breach in the planetary shell, just long enough to deploy a strike team of specialists through the opening, and reach the Queen's nervicamber. "Kill the brain," Usha explained, "and the body collapses." But it wasn't just about killing. They needed to destroy the entire psychic lattice. If any part of the Queen's mind survived, she could rebuild. They had to burn it to ash. The final team was chosen, the Lancer and the Revenant, to punch the hole. Usha Malikto, locate the Queen's chamber through mental mapping. Sergeant Elias Boone, Earth's most decorated close-quarters warrior, known as the Butcher of the Lunariates. Dr. Hannah Velt, bio-specialist and survivor of the Europa massacre. Shek knew more about alien DNA than anyone alive. And finally, Unit 0, a cybernetic child grown in a lab and trained to interface with alien psychic tech. They said she'd never spoken a word, but could hear the thoughts of stars. They were Earth's last bullet. 80 hour, the Revenant ignited its core and rammed the Dracon surface. The explosion lit up the blackness like a new sun. A whole bleeding light and shadow tore through the planet's crust. And through that opening, the strike team dropped one by one into the dark. What waited for them inside wasn't acidity. It wasn't a ship. It wasn't even technology. It was a tomb. Miles of flesh and steel, corridors that pulsed like arteries. Alien screams echoing without sound. And everywhere bones piled, Hungarian arranged in shapes that made no sense. The Queen didn't build. She harvested. She had no civilization, no culture. She fed. She absorbed. She consumed the identity of every species destroyed and kept their remains as reminders of her hunger. Now humanity was inside her. The final chapter had begun. They dropped like bullets into the bleeding hole torn through the Dracon planetary shell, falling in silence, except for the rapid synchronized beeping of their oxygen monitors. No one spoke. There was no room left for words. Everything that could be said had already been burned into blood back in Mars orbit. Inside the Dracon home world, the laws of nature twisted. It was neither flesh nor metal. It was both. The corridors pulsed with wet breath, ribbed walls gleaming with a membrane that felt alive. Metallic fibers ran through the structure like veins, carrying flickers of bioluminescence that dimmed and brightened in strange rhythms, almost like they were reacting to the team's presence. Asha Malik's visor flickered with psychic interference the second they landed. Her neuronet screamed warnings in 7 languages, but she ignored them. She was already too deep into the planet's lattice. She could feel it pressing on her temples, the Queen's mind brushing against hers like a spider testing the edge of its web. "She knows," Asha whispered. The Lancer didn't even look back. Good. The team moved fast, following Thepulse maps Asha had reconstructed based on the alien memory echoes. It wasn't a direct path. Nothing in the Queen's lair was. The walls rearranged themselves, the floor shifted like breathing lungs. Doors opened not with keys, but with fear. Elias Boone had to kill a corridor just to pass through. Stabbed it in what looked like a heart until it began like a murmur drifting through the void. A faint vibration caught by aging satellites beyond the asteroid belt. At first, no one cared. Space was full of noise radio bursts, collapsing stars, erratic pulses from dying suns. But this one didn't fade. It grew stronger, sharper. And then one day, it spoke back. By the time Earth's Unified Intelligence Coalition confirmed the signal wasn't random interference, the damage was done. A fleet was inbound. Not drones, not scouts. Actual warships, numbering in the hundreds, vast enough to eclipse sections of the Martian sky as they crossed. Humanity had only just stopped bickering over lunar borders. And now, a full-scale alien invasion loomed above. They named themselves the Dracon. Towering, metal-skinned beings with too many limbs, eyes burning like embers, and voices that cracked like thunder. They weren't here to negotiate. They sent no envoys, no treaties. Their opening statement was a live broadcast of Europa's mining colony reduced to molten ruin, the screams of workers cut short in fire. To them, we were insects fractured, petty, beneath regard. A resource to be stripped, not a people to be honored. But the Dracon were wrong. Earth was no longer the same. Decades of nuclear standoffs and climate disasters had forced unity, not out of affection, but survival. We still hated each other, but we had learned to bleed together. And when the heavens burned with their warships, it wasn't fear that stirred in us. It was fury. The Martian colonies stood first, and fell first. Engineers, settlers, families erased in moments. Yet one station broke through the silence, its distress call piercing the void before the Dracon erased it. That was enough. Within hours, Earth declared Operation Ash Dawn, the largest war host humanity had ever forged. Commanded not by a single nation, but by all of us fighters who had nothing left but the will to endure. AI pilots, orbital cannons, fusion bombers, and mechanized legions poured from hidden fortresses buried deep beneath Antarctica and the Sahara. The moon itself transformed into a war foundry almost overnight. But the true turning point was the Lancer. No one knew his birth name, only that he was a Martian-born miner who became a soldier. He had been there, on the outpost that first cried for help. The only one to live through it. Burned, broken, missing a leg, an eye, and half his chest. When Earth recovered him, he didn't ask for mercy or peace. He asked for a warship and retribution. And he was given both. The Lancer didn't command from safety. He flew the last of the Valkyrie-class dreadnoughts, Relics of old Earth wars reforged with stolen alien tech hidden in black archives. Some claimed he fused himself to the vessel, that it answered his fury more than his words. Their first clash came near Phobos. The Dracon flagship Morkth loomed over Mars like a god of fire. Its general broadcast surrender demands, naming Earth cities one by one as targets for annihilation. The Lancer didn't answer. He fired. The Valkyrie's core cannon ripped Morkth in two. No speeches. No warnings. One instant of arrogance, the next obliteration. That single shot rewrote the war. The Dracon expected us to bow, to break, but they hadn't understood. Humanity united by rage doesn't yield. It hunts. Mars became the battlefield, not Earth. We never waited for them to burn our homes. We struck first, at their fleets, their generals, even their gods. And that was the spark. The bloodiest, longest, most merciless war either race would ever endure. A war that would remind the cosmos humanity had never been prey, we were predators, and we were only beginning the hunt. The fight for Mars was meant to be humanity's funeral, but not the way the Dracon envisioned. When the Lancer ripped Morkth apart, their command structure cracked. They hadn't braced for defiance so brutal, so immediate. And for a heartbeat, in the frozen void, they faltered. Humanity did not. 6 minutes after that first strike, Earth unleashed Retribution Protocol Echo, 68 dreadnoughts uncloaked from Mars' moons. Escorted by 200 drone swarms, armed mining rigs turned kamikaze torpedoes, and orbital wreckage sharpened into shrapnel. Every relic of humanity's space age became ammunition. The Dracon formation reeled, but too late. What followed would be remembered as the Red Sky Offensive. Thousands of human pilots, most not soldiers, just fueled by fury, descended on the aliens like hornets into a blaze. They weren't only fighters. They were children of murdered colonists, engineers who'd lost comrades, farmers who'd seen lifelines burned away. This wasn't war. It was vengeance. And humanity is at its deadliest when vengeance calls. The Dracon countered with speed. Their ships, monstrous biomechanical titans, vomited streams of blue fire across Martian orbit. They didn't use weapons as we knew them. Their technology lived organic beam systems that spasmed like nervous breakdowns in the void. Whole vessels twisted as if alive, hunting human ships by sensing emotion and electromagnetic. They took down 15 Earth dreadnoughts in the first hour. The screams were cut off mid-sentence in comes. Ships cracked open like tin cans. Human pilots freed in their suits as the Dracon unleashed what we later learned was a type of neuro-shockwave cannon. Something designed not to kill, but to torment. But we kept pushing. The Lancer led the charge. His Valkyrie-class ship, the Revenant, was a monster. It had Nakru, just him and the AI network embedded in the walls. The ship didn't operate by logic. It reacted to his fury, his pain, and the Lancer had plenty of both. No one knew his full story. Rumors spread across Earth's intercom networks like wildfire. Some said his wife and daughter were burned alive in a Martian hydrodome. Others claimed he used to be peacekeeper, forced to execute colonists to stop riots during a food shortage. The only confirmed truth was this. The Dracon tried to kill him and failed. And now he made it his mission to return the favor 1,000-fold. He didn't fight like a commander. He didn't give orders from the rear. He charged the front lines, dragging the enemy's attention like a magnet. Wherever the Revenant went, Dracon ships followed. And wherever they followed, they died. He called it the Lancer's Trail. Behind him, Earth ships swarmed in. Fighters, drones, old Cold War retrofits patched with modern fusion drives. It didn't matter what flew. It just mattered that it had firepower and a human behind it willing to die with fists raised. 3 hours into the Red Sky Offensive, Mars' orbit looked like hell had cracked open. Flames and debris circled like metallic storms. Red dust from the surface kicked into orbit from falling debris. One of Mars' moons, Deimos, was split in half by a collision between a Dracon command cruiser and a nuke-laden human freighter. The explosion turned night on Earth red. But the turning point didn't come from firepower. It came from a human mistake. Somewhere in the chaos, one of Earth's drones malfunctioned. An old mining A from the Siberian Systems Corp. It didn't recognize the difference between Dracon, tech and human fleet beacons. It went rogue, pierced through enemy and ally lines alike before slamming directly into a power node aboard the Dracon central ship. No one knew what it had hit at first, but the moment the drone crashed, everything shifted. The Dracon fleet twitched, literally. Their ships spasmed, systems blinked. Their firepower dropped by 30% in an instant. Whatever the drone had struck, it was essential. Later intelligence would confirm it was a Hive relay node responsible for syncing commands between Dracon ships. They weren't independent vessels. They were an extension of a single Queen intelligence, and humanity had just given her a concussion. The Revenant saw it, and so did the Lancer. "Drive it through," he growled into the open coms. "All of it now." No protocol, no chain of command, just a single sentence. And everyone obeyed. What followed was 24 minutes of most savage, uncoordinated, glorious violence ever seen in human history. Pilots flew into alien vessels without shields, emptying plasma cells and torpedo racks point blank before detonating. Human bodies drifted in frozen orbits, faces locked in screams, still holding the controls of fighter jets glowing with residual reactor heat. One Earth soldier, Captain Juno Reyes, took control of an abandoned mining freighter on a decaying orbit and drove it straight through. A Dracon battleship using nothing but reverse thrusters and a prayer. She became a martyr and a legend in the same hour. By the 6th hour, the sky above Mars fell silent. The Dracon fleet had been decimated. Over 70% of their ships were destroyed, disabled, or fled. The few that escaped began transmitting strid retreat signals back toward the direction they came from, beyond Jupiter's shadow. But humanity wasn't done. Not the Lancer, not Earth. For the first time in its bloody, fractured history, Earth held a vote that passed with full global consensus. The question, do we wait for them to return or do we chase them to the ends of space and end this war forever? The answer was unanimous. So began the Burnback campaign. The Earth fleet, ragged, scorched, low on fuel, and missing over 30,000 souls, left Mars and pursued the Dracon homeward. But this wasn't revenge anymore. It was justice. The Servivinglian prisoners were interrogated, if you could call it that. The Dracon didn't speak in words. They spoke in-memory imprints, psychic pulses that had to be decoded by a human Dracon hybrid AI, system developed overnight in a Russian lab using salvaged tech from Earth. From these broken memories, humanity learned two terrifying truths. Earth had been targeted not because it was valuable, but because it was easy. The Dracon considered our solar system unclaimed, uncivilized, and rich in elemental matter. Their plan had been to harvest our planet's Stri. Burning, cities turned to ash, colonies shattered, the species extinguished without scream or resistance, and beside it, another path, one where Earth survived, but changed. Humanity absorbed into the network. No more wars, no more pain, no more independence. Peace at Thepris of everything else. The Lancer stared at both, silent, weighing the impossible. Behind him, he heard a whisper, "Zero. They want you to surrender to the illusion of control. To believe peace means obedience." He clenched his jaw. The Neil die a loud mistake. He turned away from both doors, walked into the void. The being's voice thundered. "There is no third path." The Lancer looked over his shoulder. "There is now." And with that, he punched the wall of the void. Not metaphorically, he struck with every memory in his body. Every scream, every death, Every time humanity had been pushed, cut, cornered, and refused to go down. He punched with therage of 1,000 dead colonists, the scream of children on Europa, the fire that burned in Mars' orbit, the echo of a queen's last cry. He punched with a lofet, and the void cracked. Light bled in. Not gentle, not soft, wild, bright, human. The chamber exploded. Back on Earth, the skies shimmered. Themanauth that hovered over Pluto, shattered. The others, those that had once encircled the solar system like executioners, retreated silently, one by one, gone. Asha, watching from the Mars orbital station, wept without knowing why. Boone stood on the balcony of Unity Tower, face to the sky. And Zero, she screamed not in fear and joy because she had felt it. The impossible has survived. The Lancer opened his eyes. He was back on Earth, same spot, same boots, knees and dirt. But the air smelled different, lighter, like something massive had just passed over and left the sky untouched. A child ran past him, laughing. He looked up. The stars were still there. The sun still rose. Humanity had not been wiped away. They had been seen and chosen. Not for obedience, not for extermination, but for the only thing the galaxy had never offered before, respect. Zero's voice echoed softly in his ear. They're gone, but they'll keep watching. He nodded. Let them. In the days that followed, Earth changed. The monoliths were gone. The threat passed, but not forgotten. The Queen's remains were buried in orbit around Neptune, sealed in a black vault of thought steel, guarded by the Revenant, now restored, now legend. The Awoken slowly reintegrated. Some couldn't handle Thedreams. Some became guides. All were honored. Zero remained everywhere and nowhere. Her mind part of every system, every ship, every whisper of static. A ghost in the machine. Loved, feared, eternal. The Lancer. He disappeared. Some say he walked into the Arctic winds and never came back. Others claim he still pilots the Revenant beyond Theorort Cloud, watching for the next ripple in the dark. Asha wrote it down in her final report. We won nothing. We proved everything. They came to conquer. But we taught them to remember.